Hi, everyone. We quite often passed by this palace. For those of you who have been to St. Petersburg, and I know some of you have, you may also recognize this palace. This is basically in the very heart of St. Petersburg by the Neva River. It's now more familiar to the locals as well as visitors as the Palace of Labor Palace, rather than the Romanov residence. Nikolaevsky Palace, it is also referred to. This is complicated. Obviously, Labor Palace is, and I wonder what the flag is, but it's not a Nazi flag. That's not. This is the symbol of one of the labor units, and that's exactly why the palace is called so. In the Soviet times, well, after the revolution, everything was nationalized, and this no longer belonged to the Romanovs. And by the way, the palace was even built by the Romanovs and for the Romanovs, mid 19th century. We will get to that. But after the revolution, it housed several organizations, and then it also housed several labor unions. So that hence the name of the palace, Labor Palace. That's it. But we start from the beginning. I don't want to get too nerdy and into too much details, but in a nutshell, that's the area, that's the Neva River. And here is one of the bridges that we also saw on the most recent tours of the White Knights, the Annunciation Bridge. It's just here around the corner, basically. Well, not even around the corner, just over here. Well, you don't see it, but that's there. And this everything here, the entire quarter up until here, all of it was purchased and given to the Romanovs to build their grand palace. And today, well, obviously, right now, everything belongs to different entities, organizations. Those are not residential places. This is not residential homes, so to speak. But now the thing is that unfortunately you cannot see all the interiors because even nowadays it's like a business center. There are 20, maybe 30 different companies that are renting the offices in the palace. That's why it's always a challenge. It's always quite difficult to access the palace other than several rooms, and we will get to that. So that's why for some rooms I mostly have photographs because yeah, usually there's no way you can see all the interiors. But you can guess how royal the scale is. It's a gigantic territory, and we will learn more about this place. That's what it looked like in the 19th century. I guess that's probably the third quarter of the 19th century because the trees are very small. And before the palace was built, this territory used to be part of the shipbuilding yard because not far from there is the Admiralty, right? The shipbuilding yard of St. Petersburg, which we saw gazillion of times on my walking tours in the previous life. I don't know, two lives ago, maybe. And there was one of the warehouses for ropes and also the rope making workshop. So I would say that in general, um, it has always this area has always been the labor square, but that's the name obviously of the Soviet period. So the palace and the square around it was called the Labor Square. But even back in the times of Peter the Great, early 1700s, this was sort of a labor square, and people worked really hard to produce all the ropes. But when it gets to this palace, it was commissioned by Nicholas I to well to be a home for one of his sons, actually his eldest son. Well, and one of the eldest sons, not the eldest one, Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolayevich, or Nicholas Nikolayevich, because his father was Nicholas. And of course, they would never get creative with the names. That nothing. So Nicholas, yeah. So Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich, that this gigantic palace was meant to be for him and for his wife, and that was the present from his father. A very generous one. A very generous one. That's why it's called the Palace of Nikolai, the Nikolaevsky Palace, and that's the bridge I'm talking about, the Annunciation Bridge, the first permanent metal bridge constructed in the city in 1850s. And as you can see, the what you can't see much of it, but the palace is just over there, the Labor Palace, the so-called Labor Palace. This is the English embankment. And by the way, this is the Rumeantsev Palace that we visited last week and also yesterday. That's another palace that we've never been before. And that's the palace. It also has some scandalous stories hidden behind its walls, again, with regards to the Romanovs. The recording as of yesterday will be available hopefully around these days. Yeah, but as you can see in the very end of it, in the square, that in the Soviet times was called the Labor Square. In the imperial times, it was called just like the bridge, Annunciation Square, because there was built the Annunciation Church, which would be taken down, I believe, in the early 1930s, maybe late 1920s. That's that very, very first metal bridge, which I showed you on the boat trip and during the White Nights. And I told you that this bridge originally would be opening sideways to let bigger vessels sail through. That's that very bridge. 1851, that's when it was, well, uh, open to public and open for use. And that's the photo of that bridge in the pre-revolutionary times. How do I know that? Because of the orthography. We have this character here. It was used, and also this that looks like I. It was used only before the revolution. And when the Bolsheviks came, they carried out multiple reforms according to the orthography reform. That's what the bridge looked like, and it would be rebuilt several times. On the bridge, there used to be the Annunciation Chapel, and well, the chapel remained even there you go. So originally these two sections would open sideways, one to this side, one to another side, and the chapel would stay in the middle. Eventually, when there was a big reconstruction of the bridge, the chapel survived, but then they didn't. And now there is a chapel, but a little bit to the side. But that's not that relevant. The relevant is that this area, when the bridge was constructed in 1851, this area immediately became, well, I would say threefold as expensive, because accessibility, because that became much easier to communicate between the islands, and there was no need to go all around it to because it was the first bridge. There were no other bridges in the area. There were only temporary ones, and that was not that convenient. So immediately the area got extremely expensive, but the Romanovs had enough funds, and eventually this palace was finished. The Labor Palace for a long time actually had this red facade, sort of scarlet red, just as well as the Winter Palace, by the way, right? The Hermitage Museum building, the main Hermitage Museum building, it also was of the scarlet color. It was never yellow. I mean, the Labor Palace, the Nikolaevsky Palace, was never yellow, was never green, but the modern day architecture of it is the decision taken in the 20th century. I'm not sure why. And these are the photos still before the revolution. There are trams running there, as you can see, but still some carriages. And at that point, you can see that there is almost no trees. There's still not too many of them. But as of now, there are quite a lush greenery in this area around the palace and also behind it. So that church is not here anymore. On the spot where the church was, there is now a square, a kind of a roundabout, and that is it. And behind it, on the spot behind it, there is the Museum of Naval History. Other than that, the palace is the same, and the I would say that some interiors even remember the church, and even remember the events of 1920s. This area was always crowded and always participated in multiple revolutionary activities. And no wonder that shortly after the revolution, in the Labor Palace, several labor unions were housed. And all the demonstrations on the Labor Day in May would start from here, or either start or finish by the Labor Palace. And here it says now, "Hail to the proletarian dictatorship." Yeah, yeah. What can I say? Soviet period, and you can see the cars already. You can see trams. Right now, the palace. I would say it's sometimes open to public for excursions, and that's exactly how I was able to get to the palace to film some of the rooms on my phone. But it's never enough, so I added lots of photographs. Also, I found in the archives the photo of the original plan. Originally, the palace was supposed to be much smaller and a bit more outdated, a bit more like 18th century rather than 19th century. But eventually, Nicholas I said he didn't like it, and he asked another architect, Andrei Steckenschneider, to come up with another plan. And the way we see the palace now, that's all the idea of Steckenschneider, who liked neo-Renaissance a lot, and he basically revived the neo-Renaissance after the Empire style, after the Classicism, and that's what it looks nowadays. It's still the same. It's gigantic, and as I said, there are about several dozens of different companies and facilities that are renting their offices here. Now it says the Labor Palace. It has retained its Soviet name, but we know that it used to be a royal palace. And by the way, some of you who have been to St. Petersburg may even have been to this palace, because during the at least before the pandemic, I don't know about now, but before the pandemic, here used to be held folk shows, Russian folk shows, and tourists will be brought here quite often. Yeah, it was definitely the part of the package tour and part of, I would say, very touristy program. But it was a good folk show with good music. The palace has good acoustics. The main concert hall has good acoustics. So if you happen to be in this palace, you were shown the best folk show. And I know I know I have many other folk shows to compare it to. Now this is the screenshot from the Google Maps. And as you can see, but that's the screenshot I found online. I didn't take mine. There's a lot of greenery during the summertime. This is the boulevard, the Konnogvardeyski Boulevard, the Horse Guard Boulevard. It's called so because in this area used to be several stables for the horse lifeguard horse regiment, and this entire block used to belong to the Romanovs and to Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich. I will speak about him a bit later, and the stories that took place here as well. So that's the palace itself. Then this would be the stables and the horse riding manege. This is the small private garden, and there's no access to the private garden. This used to be the home for sort of guest. These two used to be the guest houses for some honorable guests. This used to be the residential home for people who worked for the in the stables and maintained the manege and stables. And here, in this place, is almost the same size as the palace itself. This is where lived the staff, everyone who maintained, who serviced the this palace lived here. Huh? So that's the royal residence. Up until late 19th century, they still thought in these terms of big palaces, a gigantic territory, because they didn't really have to worry about the maintenance because it was still um, slavery, right? Serfdom, and also because, well, it was cheaper to maintain due to this and also some other things. But things started to change, and that's why further on, grandchildren of the Romanovs would prefer smaller places because it got a lot cheaper to maintain. Now let's move on, and we passed by this area multiple times on the tour, but I never really had enough time to tell you more stories around it. That's the boulevard that we now have, and it will still have that boulevard, but here the trees are very small because they well probably had been planted a season before. And yeah, they're regional. By the way, as I said, from the facade itself and all the buildings within the complex are original. They could do some restoration, especially the ones that are not facing the main embankment, which obviously has to be all prepped up and prilled. But this one is not that important, so because it's not often seen, and this now is not hasn't been restored yet. But in general, the facade of the palace and the railing, everything is original and has been restored. As we often walked past this boulevard, that's the boulevard, and imagine that this was the interiors in their residential home of the one where the servants and maids used to live. Servants and maids with their families would be given apartment per family. Small one or two bedroom apartment would be given to a family, and they would be living here for free because they worked for the palace. Obviously, that's already the times in 1850, 56, 57, the palace was commissioned to Anton Steckenschneider, and in early 1800s, so shortly after the abolishment of slavery, the palace will be finished, and this would be one of the last palaces, Romanov palaces, that was built, I would say, so big. That's because, again, as I said before, the slavery abolishment, they termed in this, they would think in these bigger terms. They also thought, they hoped that the labor would be free. So after that, they would have to reconsider the costs and their budgets. So that's Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich. As usual, Nicholas I himself was a military man. He was a military engineer, and all his sons obviously were in the military. Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich was in charge of several army regiments, and he had quite a good military career. However, many contemporaries claim that he was a lot more interested. He was in charge, for example, of one of the lifeguards horse regiments, and many people claimed, many of his contemporaries claimed, he was a lot more interested and took a lot more care of the horses rather than the guards, rather than the officers and soldiers that served in that army regiment. What we're looking at, it's not my photo, it's a photo from the internet of a restaurant in the horse stables. This restaurant, Unfortunately, I have never been there myself, but I indeed have taken many, well, have taken many tourists there or just booked a table for them. For some of them, right after the folk show or regardless of the folk show. And so they enjoyed the restaurant. They also enjoyed the interiors. Let me show you. There's one illustration of what all the horse stables looked like, and the horse stables was gigantic. It was meant to house about 100 horses. Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich, apart from his duty in the army, also had a hobby, horse breeding. And because he could afford it, he had horses delivered to him from all over the world. He had some of the really exotic breeds of horses in his stables, and he uh, he took the initiative in horse breeding, in selection process, in everything. So he kept a close eye on everything that happened mm, in the um, uh, in the horse stables. And the restaurant has nothing to do with him, but look at the interiors. That's the restaurant. So I have taken here some groups, some tourist groups, and you can see why, because the restaurant has clearly the space to house a lot of tourist groups. And that's not a cheap place. But when you are there, I mean, it is, you feel royal, even though those were only the horse stables, but you feel, I guess, you feel like $1 million. Just disregard uh, the vibe of the horse stables. That's basically it. So the gymnasium is the name of the restaurant. I'm not sure whether the restaurant is still there, but the house for sure. It's 100%. It's still there. And speaking of, so we've spoken of the horse stables. That's the photos from the one of the websites I found with the advertisement. And there's also the horse riding manege, right? And there's also another facility. It's called Sports Palace. In St. Petersburg, even the gyms look royal. Even the gyms are housed in the palaces in St. Petersburg. And that's the example. I have never been inside. These are just photos from the internet. I don't know whether the palace is still there, but I mean, the gym is still there, but for a long time, it was like that. And that's where the manege used to be. Quite interesting. This is where the horses would exercise, and also that's where the treadmills are nowadays, and the humans work out. Why not? Not too bad. So I guess the membership was quite expensive there. I think so. Like, like I've never seen a gym of that opulent. We are skipping the Q&A now because we're having two tours back to back. So I'd rather just wrap it up a little earlier, have the Q&A, and then rejoin with another link and with a tour on the Soviet deficit. And now the illustration to remind you where we are. So everything that we have just seen is a little bit to that side. And now let's focus on the main palace, which is huge. But as I said, not all the interiors survived, and not all the survived interiors we can see. Nikolai Nikolaevich, as I said, he was a military man, and he had quite a, I would say, he climbed quickly the career ladder in the military, and eventually he became the commander of several army regiments in the Russian-Turkish War. And however, as I said, he was always a lot more interested in horses rather than people, and he was not very good with his strategy. That's what many contemporaries claim. So eventually it was decided to substitute him with someone else. But nevertheless, the Russian army, well, it's not like it won that Russian-Turkish war, but it managed to help liberate Bulgaria and several more territories on the Balkans. And for that, And because the Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich was one of the people behind that liberation, there was placed a monument to him, and it used to be placed not far from this area. Water, please. So this monument, however, was only established in 1914, and then the revolution happened, and one of the first things that the revolutionaries would do with regards to the urbanization, that would they would get rid of the monuments to the Soviets, to the monarchs and everyone and everything related to the monarchy regime. Well, that's how it was. So this monument was melted into into something else. So we don't know what happened to it. Well, I mean, we know that it was melted into something else, but we're not sure what exactly was made from the melted metal. Now let's move on a little bit, and let's see the interiors, as I promised. I have a photo from Wikipedia, by the way, and that's clearly from one of the folk shows. Again, that felt very touristy, very glossy, not authentic, but it was vibrant. It was a good quality folk show with very good choirs, with good actors, good costumes, and it looked very expensive. So that was a good folk show. And normally, just look at the scale, right? Look at the size. This is the glass staircase, and this is just one of the middle sections of it. You will see it's gigantic. It just occupies all the three floors of the building. And as you enter as a tourist back like 5 years ago, you would be greeted by either actors dressed in Russian national costumes or in the 18th century costumes of times of Peter the Great. And the magic of the folk show would start immediately from the entrance, and it would never leave you up until the very end. So it was a good folk show, still a touristy thing, but a good one. And the interesting thing that further on, the Romanovs had to sell the palace because it got too expensive to maintain it. And well, because they should have gone for something a lot smaller and modest, but they did not. And eventually, in around 1910s, the Xenias Institute for Noble Girls was housed in this building, and these are the girls that studied in this facility. It was kind of a boarding school for girls, very much like Smolny, I would say. And so here are the girls going elsewhere, and imagine how it felt living in such a palace, in a royal palace. That's just as you enter, you see this space, and then the steps would take you two more floors up. The chandelier is original, however, with a lot of rock crystal items restored because they got destroyed at the time of the Second World War. Other than that, it's the original staircase with the marble, with all the stones that you can see. And obviously, the marble is from Italy. That's from the Soviet times. And look at that. So, this is my own camera roll. It's not the best quality. And I just joined one of the tours for, you know, for tourists. And that was the only opportunity for me to see a lot more than just the main staircase and the main concert hall, which I have a better video of. And all that new Renaissance beauty. And yeah, I would say that this is maybe early eclecticism rather than even the new Renaissance. You see elements of different styles here, and it all survived. Amazingly, the main staircase wasn't really damaged this much by these Soviet institutions. Maybe because the staircase itself was sort of a common space, and nobody wanted to take charge of restoring it. Who knows? And here you can also see that there are no extra supports to the staircase, and it's just embedded in the walls quite deeply. There are not so many staircases like that. The ironwork, the details, the plaster decorations are all original, obviously restored. Look at quite details this was. And this is the photo taken at times of the Romanovs still. And ahead of us, you can see entrance to the church. Every Romanov residence was supposed to have a church. Not only Romanovs, every royal residence was, aristocratic residence was supposed to have a church. And by the way, also here, let me show you. This is the initials, two letters N, Nikolay Nikolaevich. It's like letter H. Russian N is, it looks like a English letter H. Nikolay Nikolaevich. And luckily, the church is still there. And it is a functioning church, officially recognized. The services are held there, and anyone can come and pray in the church, obviously in the working hours of the Palace of Labor. We have several old photographs, well, from the times of the Romanovs, and as you can see, there is a crypt there, and you can see the decoration. Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich was in charge of the interior decorations himself. He was inspired by one of the churches he visited when traveling around Russia. And he liked that church so much that he asked several artists to go to the town of Rostov to copy the designs of the church. And they did that. They came and then they built the church and they decorated it the same way as that church in Rostov. Right now, these are the photographs from the internet, and you can see what was left of the uh, interiors of the church. It was actually covered by the layers of paint, because there's no way that in the Soviet period they could tolerate watching all these saints on the walls. Definitely not. And they would cover it up with multiple layers of quite toxic paint that clearly added to the deterioration of the church decoration of the paint, and also the plaster layer. But right now, I would say it's more of a just cleaning of everything and of what has survived to the date. As of now, they haven't gotten to the restoration of the church, but they are happy with whatever they have. What they have is enough for the services to be held. And this is also the photo from the imperial times, the crypt. Nikolay Nikolaevich was the one who did a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. He visited Jerusalem. He visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he was impressed with the edicule, with the tomb of Jesus, and he commissioned to build a small crypt that would look very much similar to the tomb of Jesus, and there was placed the stones from the Holy Land, from Golgotha, and also there was placed a stone, the same as, well, very much similar to the stone on which the body of Jesus was laid in Jerusalem. And that church was open to everyone who lived in the palace, for everyone who worked with the maintenance of the palace, people who worked for the horse stables. Everyone could visit it, and the Romanovs themselves prayed there too. Well, that's the only one, the only photograph, and obviously all the icons, everything valuable was all taken from the church. That's understandable, I guess. And also, as you can see, there's interesting things here. In the Soviet times, they decided to make the church to to add another floor. So what they did, they decided to um, build in another floor. That this space here of a grayish color. That's where the floor used to be. And on that floor, there was another office of another organization. And this was all cleared up, and this additional floor was it was eliminated only in the 20th century, late 20th century after the revolution, obviously. The icons are new. The icon status is not well. I mean, it exists, but that's the new one. But anyone, as I said, anyone in this area can come, depending on the working hours of the House of Labor, and can come and pray to this church, in this church. So, uh, unfortunately, there are not so many photographs that survived. Luckily, the church that inspired the Great Duke has been restored, and they have very good quality restoration work there. So the interiors. This is not my photo. That's from the internet. The Whitehall, uh, Grand Duke and his wife were not really big party animals. I will get down to his wife, and in the next episode we will explore some more interiors, and we'll continue with the story of the scandals in the family. We are approaching it today. Don't worry, but it's gonna take me more than one episode to sever the details of the interesting relationships. The opulent interiors, as you can see, they had infinite resources. So this room was these are the gala rooms, so they were used for official receptions. Obviously, since he was the Grand Duke and he was in charge of the regiment of several army regiments, obviously a lot of events army-wise would be held in the palace. He had his study, obviously. He had the rooms where the meetings would be carried out, but there were also rooms for concerts, for dancing, for gatherings, the dining rooms, and stuff and stuff and stuff. However, the rooms we have now at display, well, they're a lot less than they originally used to be. Speaking of this fireplace, I well, it took me a while, but it felt that I had seen this fireplace before, and indeed. So this is the fireplace that mm, it was made like a catalog trade, which was quite widespread in the 19th century. Let's say there was a marble workshop, a masonry by Triscorni, the Italian mason, and so Triscorni created a model, and there were several designs of fireplaces. They were all printed in the catalogs. And then you could just choose the one you want, and it will be made for you. It could be made to measure, depending on the size of your fireplace and whatnot. They could also come up with some other stones, but they would normally go for marble, obviously. And that's how there are a lot of similar fireplaces that can be found in multiple palaces in St. Petersburg. But so even though this is a catalog trade, that was still a very expensive, I would say, item. The Chinese room, please don't expect to see any any Chinese interiors there. It's called Chinese because for some time when the couple moved in, and it took, so as I said, they altogether it took them 5 years to move into the palace. And for a few years in this room used to be placed the collection of porcelain that belonged to the wife of Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich. Other than that, she got rid of all the porcelain quite quickly. Not because she broke it, but because she decided to give it for charity. The pink drawing room. So we're thinking here about charity. I just mentioned charity. And indeed, So this family, regardless of all the opulence of their interiors and I would say, the territorial greed with which the palace was built, this family was known for their generosity, absolutely endless, maybe even boundless generosity. But when you see this pink drawing room, and the rooms are not even pink anymore, and it wasn't pink for a long time. Uh, it's hard to imagine that this was the generosity of such level, but that's actually true. But that's an interesting story. And you see these ladies here, they caryatid. This one is holding a harp. This one, I'm not sure what she's holding. Basically, it was a drawing room for, well, just enjoying themselves royal style. And right now, the rooms that I was able to see, they were, well, normally the rooms that where different events can be held separately from all the tenants, all the offices that are renting from the palace. That was it. And there's a little bit of a history of the palace itself that we can read. But other than that, there's just several rooms, and the rest is more like a teaser, because the companies that are renting from the palace are not exactly willing to let you in. But some rooms are just absolutely incredible. Some rooms that are not on display, unfortunately. Um, anyway, another room, another drawing room, and it's now open also for events. Anyone can rent a room here for their event, for a party, for a conference. This one is, for example, a dining room. Everything here is about hunting, because Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich was also an avid hunter. And this room is about, since it's a dining room, it's, has a lot of scenes of animals becoming food, about hunting and stuff and stuff. You can see the decorations here quite in abundance. Fruit, veggies, prey, poultry, meat, anything, whatever the whimsies would want of the Romanovs, obviously. And yes, the amazing thing is that the fireplaces are still there. They're still there, but they're not functioning, obviously, anymore. This is the dead birds. So that's Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich. And in so they lived for 5 years in the Winter Palace, that when they were waiting for their own palace to be ready. And when they moved in with Duchess Alexandra Petrovna of Russia, they lived happily, but not ever after, maybe for a couple of years. And that's exactly when, well, the Duchess has always been quite generous, and it was a must to donate some some good money for different causes. And yes, the grand duchesses and wives of the monarchs, they would normally be patrons of multiple organizations, and that was the same case with the duchess. However, at some point, it kind of went out of control, and so that's exactly when she started donating a lot more than it was agreed. And she, little by little, started establishing different facilities, different hospitals for orphans. The hospitals, the gynecology hospitals for women, where women could be given absolute anonym, where they could be absolutely anonymously seen by doctors. That was a very sensitive topic. That was a very sensitive issue. Also, she was in charge of several medical facilities, and more and more and more. And that's when, at some point, she decided to sell all the jewelry that she had, the porcelain collection that she had. She started selling, and then she would say, "Okay, so yeah, they had children together, by the way." two sons. And that's when she started saying, I don't need the jewelry. And she would decline joining the parties, the events that she was supposed to join because of the protocol, because they still had to follow a lot of this official no, events, and they had to participate. But she would always come up with an excuse, and then she started wearing a lot more modest clothing. She sold her dresses, and eventually she would be, well, looking like that. I mean, that's the family photo. That's her. That's him. The two kids. And look what she's wearing. Like he's looking at her, but it looks like he's looking through her. And at some point, she just said she was no longer interested in the sex life, and everyone around them started noticing this. And there are a lot of contemporaries that would claim that she started looking ugly, and everything that she was interested would be the orphans, not even her own children, helping the poor, helping those deprived. And she basically forgotten about how to be a wife and a mother to her own children. There wasn't much that Grand Duke Nikolay Nikolaevich could do. I don't mean to fence out anyone. He tried to get divorced, but that was not possible. At that point, we will talk about it later. But he quite quickly found a woman that made up for everything that he had been missing for a long time, including big love. And she was a ballerina. And well, next time when we have a tour, I will carry on taking you to the interiors, more interiors of the palace, and I'll tell you a lot more stories about that. And he is not the first Romanov who loved ballerinas, and not the last Romanov who loved ballerinas. And speaking of the Grand Duchess, so eventually, I'll tell you later what happened and how they managed to get divorced. That's also an interesting story. But she was quite happy how things unfolded, and eventually she left Saint Petersburg, came to Kiev. In Kiev, she became a nun. She donated the huge sum of money that she had for the construction of a big monastery, and so she died as a nun in that monastery in Kiev, and she was proclaimed a saint by the Russian Orthodox Church. That's the story so far, and a lot more will be shared next time. The next episode, by the way, is already scheduled, and you can find it on my website. We skipped the Q&A because I'm doing two tours back to back, and it's high time we got down to the Q&A. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, so the video quality is the best I could come up with. These are my own videos, and also a lot of photographs from the internet. I wasn't able to see all the rooms, but the thing is, for a long time, I was putting this tour off, and I was thinking, well, it's not really an impressive video. It's not very good quality, but the story, and it's still the interior that I have never taken you to. I think it's still not so bad. And since we're talking about some scandals and um, some spicy stories, I think that's well, it very very much fits the narrative. What were the tall gold objects in the Chinese room? Rock crystal vases. That was it. Just the rock crystal vases. I remember them. I've been to those rooms. I have been a couple of times too. They were always there. They could have been just gifts. I'm not sure. There are no memorial items in the palace because all those organizations who were placed by the Bolsheviks in this palace, they got rid of everything. They used it, abused it, and then they threw it away or whatnot. I'm not sure, but there are no memorial items, unfortunately. Plus, the Empress herself sold everything she had. Yeah, so she got a bit carried away with all the charity work, but she was happy, but he wasn't. and they couldn't get divorced because, well, originally he asked for a divorce several times, but the emperor Alexander II would say, well, no, that's inappropriate to have a divorce, and that's how he had to live in two families and have children with both women. Yeah. You've shown several paintings in the presentation. Who are the painters? Which paintings did I show? The paintings of the palace. I don't know who the authors are. These are just the paintings I found online of the views of Saint Petersburg. There were released, not have, there were released quite a number of catalogs, watercolor catalogs of sites of Saint Petersburg. So I don't know the authors, unfortunately. Is the Duchess convent still there? Yes, but I know that it was changed significantly. But yes, I don't think you can have a hot dog there. I would think that they would rather serve some Russian food or maybe just. Well, I don't think it would be that because this I know from also my personal experience when we were looking for a place for our own wedding, uh, because we had about 80 guests at the wedding. We were looking for different places because I didn't want to squander everything. Well, and it was quite expensive. So I think for a budget that one would pay for the rent, they wouldn't go for hot dogs. Or maybe they would. So maybe they would only have the money left for hot dogs. Maybe, who knows? Who knows? Okay, so in 3 minutes from now, Misha and I are going to tune in with a whole different topic, with the deficit in the Soviet times. And let me share with you the links once again for this tour and also for the two market tours that I have done over this weekend. So the beer markets last last night, it's there on my YouTube channel, as well as the market tour by the lake. The market was canceled in the morning, by the way, and I didn't know about it. So when I came, I only found the beautiful lake with nice views around and a lot of wind, due to which the market had been canceled first thing. And we had a nice stroll. We had coffee together. We took some selfies, and yeah, many things. We enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. So, but it's gonna be take three on that market tour next weekend. I will schedule it shortly, and some tours are already there on my website, by the way. So you have the link for the deficit and ingenuity of the USSR. And then at my regular time, Walls and Gates of Jerusalem Part 2. Thank you so much for joining me. You know, you can support me in two ways by either sending a PayPal donation or you could buy me coffees. And why was the Bridge Chapel on the bridge? Um, Maybe just out of superstitious moods. I'm not sure. I guess maybe because it was the first bridge and they were extra cautious about it. That's a good question that never really occurred to me why there was a chapel built there. But the chapel was basically part of that church that would be destroyed in 1930s. The Ascension Bridge and the Ascension Cathedral. This could be the reason, and exactly that's why the bridge was called the Ascension Bridge, because of that. Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you, Joanne. I hope you are enjoying where you are. I totally lost track of your travels, but I hope you are enjoying yourself. And thank you, Joy. I will see you shortly, together with Misha in a couple of minutes from now. We just need to get to join with another link. I'll see you soon. Yes. Bye bye. And I will share the recordings at some point. Thank you, Ashrit. It's been nice to see you. So part 2 next weekend.